The Power of Rejection, written and published by Rising Audiobook. Introduction. Some of the most painful moments in life begin with one word: no. No, you're not chosen. No, you're not good enough. No, we don't want you. No, this relationship is over. No, you didn't make it. And sometimes those moments don't just disappoint you, they change you. There is a kind of silence that follows rejection that almost everyone understands. The unanswered message, the opportunity given to someone else, the dream that collapsed after years of effort, the feeling of standing still while the world keeps moving without you. Rejection can make even the strongest person question their worth. But what if rejection was never meant to destroy you? What if the worst moment of your life was actually the moment your transformation began? Most people spend their lives avoiding rejection because they fear pain. They stay quiet instead of speaking. They hide instead of trying. They choose comfort over growth. But the people who become truly powerful learn something different. Rejection is not punishment. It is preparation. Every no forces you to grow stronger, think deeper, and discover who you are without applause, validation, or acceptance. In this audiobook, you will discover how rejection can become fuel, confidence, discipline, and power. And if you stay until the end, you may realize that the doors that refused to open were only leading you toward the life you were truly meant to build. Chapter 1. Why rejection hurts so much. Rejection is one of the few experiences almost every human being understands without explanation. It does not matter how intelligent, talented, attractive, or successful someone appears on the outside. At some point, everyone experiences being ignored, excluded, replaced, criticized, abandoned, or told they are not enough. And even though rejection is a normal part of life, it still has the power to affect people deeply. Many people underestimate how painful rejection can be because the wound is invisible. There are no scars to point at, no broken bones, no physical injury that others can immediately see. Yet emotional rejection often stays in the mind far longer than physical pain. A harsh comment from years ago can still replay in someone's memory. A failed relationship can continue affecting confidence long after it ends. Being rejected for an opportunity can make a person question their entire future. This happens because the human brain is designed for connection and acceptance. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. Being excluded from the tribe once meant danger, vulnerability, and isolation. Even though modern life has changed, the brain still reacts strongly to social rejection because, deep down, humans are wired to fear disconnection. That is why rejection can feel physical. Studies in psychology and neuroscience have shown that emotional pain activates some of the same brain regions involved in physical pain. In simple terms, the brain often struggles to separate emotional hurt from physical hurt. This explains why rejection can create heaviness in the chest, loss of energy, anxiety, sleeplessness, or even physical exhaustion. The body responds as if something threatening has happened. But rejection does not only hurt because of the moment itself. Often it hurts because it awakens older wounds people have carried for years. Many adult fears are connected to childhood experiences. A child who constantly faced criticism may grow into an adult who fears judgment in every situation. Someone who rarely received emotional support may become extremely sensitive to abandonment. A child who was ignored, compared to others, or made to feel inadequate may spend adulthood desperately trying to earn validation from everyone around them. These experiences quietly shape behavior. Some people become people pleasers because they fear disappointing others. Some avoid relationships because they fear emotional pain. Others never pursue ambitious goals because failure feels too personal. In many cases, rejection is not only about the present moment. It becomes connected to years of insecurity, self-doubt, and emotional memory. This is why two people can experience the same rejection, but respond completely differently. One person may move forward quickly, while another becomes emotionally crushed for months. The difference is often not the rejection itself, but the meaning attached to it. When rejection becomes personal, people begin to believe it defines their value. They stop seeing rejection as an event and start seeing it as identity. Instead of thinking, "I failed," they think, "I am a failure." Instead of saying, "This opportunity was not right for me," they say, "I will never be good enough." That mindset becomes dangerous because it slowly changes how people live their lives. Fear of rejection is one of the biggest reasons people remain trapped inside comfort zones. Many people never speak honestly because they fear criticism. Many never apply for opportunities because they fear hearing no. Many stay in unhealthy relationships because loneliness feels more painful than settling. Others hide their creativity, ideas, talents, and ambitions because rejection feels safer to avoid than to face. Over time, this creates a quiet form of suffering. A person may look comfortable on the outside, while internally feeling frustrated, unfulfilled, and disconnected from their real potential. The problem is not always failure. Often, the deeper problem is avoidance. Avoidance feels safe in the moment, but it slowly destroys confidence. Every time someone avoids risk because of fear, they unintentionally teach themselves that they are too weak to handle discomfort. As this pattern repeats, fear grows stronger and possibilities grow smaller. But there is an important truth most people eventually realize: rejection is unavoidable. No matter how careful, talented, or prepared someone becomes, life will still include disappointment. Not everyone will understand you. Not every opportunity will work out. Not every relationship will last. Trying to build a life completely free from rejection is impossible. The real goal is not to avoid rejection. The goal is to develop the emotional strength to survive it without losing yourself. That strength begins when people stop seeing rejection as proof of worthlessness and start seeing it as part of growth. Every successful person has experienced rejection in some form. The difference is that resilient people do not allow rejection to permanently define their identity. They learn from it, adapt through it, and continue moving forward despite it. Rejection hurts because humans care deeply about connection, belonging, and meaning. But pain itself is not weakness. Pain is often evidence that something matters to you. The danger begins only when rejection convinces you to stop trying, stop growing, or stop believing in your own potential. The people who transform their lives are not the people who never experience rejection. They are the people who refuse to let rejection become the final conclusion about who they are. Chapter 2. Rejection is not a reflection of your worth. One of the most damaging things rejection can do is convince a person that their value depends on other people's approval. A failed interview, a lost opportunity, criticism from others, or the end of a relationship can quickly become more than just an experience. For many people, rejection turns into a personal judgment about who they are. This is where emotional pain becomes dangerous. The rejection itself is often temporary, but the meaning attached to it can last for years. Human beings naturally search for meaning in everything that happens to them. When something painful occurs, the mind immediately asks questions. Why did this happen? What does this say about me? Am I not good enough? The problem is that people often answer these questions emotionally instead of rationally. They confuse outcomes with identity. A person can fail and still be intelligent. A person can be rejected and still be valuable. A person can lose an opportunity and still have enormous potential. But emotionally, many people struggle to separate what happened from who they are. This pattern often begins early in life. Many people grow up receiving praise only when they succeed. Good grades bring approval. Achievements bring attention. Obedience brings acceptance. Over time, some people unconsciously learn that their worth depends on performance. As adults, this mindset becomes fragile because every rejection starts feeling like a threat to identity. Consider a talented student who fails one important exam. The result reflects one moment, one performance, one set of circumstances, but instead of viewing it objectively, the student begins believing they are unintelligent or incapable. Their confidence collapses, not because of the exam itself, but because they allowed one outcome to define their entire identity. This happens constantly in everyday life. Someone gets rejected from a job and begins believing they are incompetent. Someone experiences heartbreak and begins believing they are unlovable. Someone receives criticism and suddenly doubts every ability they once trusted. But rejection rarely tells the full story. In reality, many rejections have more to do with timing, fit, circumstances, or perspective than personal worth. A company may reject a candidate simply because another applicant had slightly more experience. A relationship may fail because two people were emotionally incompatible, not because one person lacked value. An opportunity may disappear because the timing was wrong, not because the dream itself was impossible. Unfortunately, emotional pain narrows perspective. When people are hurt, they tend to interpret rejection in the harshest possible way. Instead of seeing complexity, they see personal failure. Instead of recognizing circumstances, they attack their self-worth. This mindset creates insecurity because it places emotional control in the hands of other people. If confidence depends entirely on external validation, then confidence becomes unstable. Praise creates temporary happiness, while criticism creates emotional collapse. Approval becomes addictive because self-worth feels impossible without it. That is why many people spend years trying to please everyone around them. They fear disapproval because they believe rejection confirms their deepest insecurities. They become overly dependent on recognition, compliments, acceptance, or social validation to feel valuable. But real confidence cannot be built on unstable foundations. True confidence begins when self-worth stops depending on outcomes and opinions. This does not mean becoming arrogant or ignoring feedback. It means understanding that rejection is an experience, not an identity. It means recognizing that your value as a human being cannot be fully measured by one moment, one decision, or one person's opinion. Emotionally strong people understand this difference. They allow rejection to teach them without allowing it to define them. They can admit mistakes without believing they are worthless. They can experience disappointment without losing self-respect. They understand that failure is part of growth, not evidence of permanent inadequacy. This shift in mindset changes how people approach life. When self-worth becomes internal instead of external, rejection loses some of its power. People become more willing to take risks because failure no longer threatens their identity. They speak more honestly because disagreement no longer destroys their confidence. They pursue opportunities with courage because rejection no longer feels like emotional death. Many of the world's most successful individuals faced repeated rejection before they achieved recognition. Their success did not happen because they avoided failure. It happened because they refused to interpret rejection as proof of worthlessness. Life becomes emotionally exhausting when every setback becomes personal, but freedom begins when people understand that rejection is often information, not condemnation. Sometimes rejection reveals areas that need improvement. Sometimes it redirects people toward better opportunities. Sometimes it exposes environments, relationships, or goals that were never right to begin with. Most importantly, rejection reminds people that no human being can control every outcome. Even talented, disciplined and hard-working individuals will experience disappointment. This is not evidence of weakness. It is part of being human. Your worth does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it. Your value is not erased because one opportunity did not work out. One rejection cannot measure the depth of your potential, character, intelligence, or future. The danger is not rejection itself. The real danger is allowing temporary outcomes to become permanent beliefs about who you are. The moment you stop tying your identity to every no, you begin developing a kind of confidence that rejection can no longer destroy. Chapter 3. The hidden opportunities inside every no. Most people see rejection as the end of something, the end of a plan, a relationship, an opportunity, or a dream. In the moment, rejection feels like loss because the mind focuses entirely on what did not happen. People think about the opportunity they missed, the acceptance they wanted, or the future they imagined. Very few people immediately recognize that rejection can also be redirection. This is one of the hardest truths to understand while experiencing disappointment. Human beings naturally become emotionally attached to expectations. Once the mind creates a vision of how life should unfold, any interruption feels painful. People do not only grieve reality, they also grieve the future they imagined in their minds. That is why rejection often feels deeply personal. A person applies for a job and already imagines the new lifestyle, the financial relief, and the confidence the position would bring. Someone enters a relationship and imagines long-term emotional security. A student dreams of entering a specific university and builds their identity around that goal. When rejection happens, it does not only remove the opportunity itself, it destroys the imagined future connected to it. But what people rarely understand in painful moments is that not every desired path is the right path. Sometimes rejection protects people from environments that would eventually damage them. Sometimes the opportunity people desperately wanted would have created stress, emptiness, unhealthy pressure, or emotional exhaustion later in life. The problem is that human beings usually judge situations based only on immediate emotions. If something feels painful now, they assume it must be bad for their future. But life is often more complicated than that. Many people can look back on experiences they once considered devastating and later realize those moments redirected them toward something better. A rejected application forced them to develop new skills. A failed relationship pushed them toward emotional maturity. Losing one opportunity created space for another they never would have discovered otherwise. This does not mean rejection feels good in the moment. Pain is real, disappointment is real, confusion is real, but pain and purpose can exist at the same time. One reason rejection creates growth is because it interrupts comfort. Human beings naturally prefer certainty and familiarity. People often remain in situations that are predictable rather than pursue what truly challenges them. But rejection forces movement. It creates discomfort that exposes weaknesses, habits, insecurities, and limitations people might otherwise ignore. Growth rarely begins during periods of comfort. Most people change only when staying the same becomes more painful than evolving. A person rejected from a job may finally realize they have depended too heavily on one skill set. Someone rejected socially may recognize they have built their self-worth entirely around external approval. A failed business attempt may expose poor discipline, weak preparation, or unrealistic expectations. These realizations are uncomfortable, but they are also valuable. Rejection often becomes the mirror that forces people to see themselves honestly. Without disappointment, many people would never develop resilience. They would never strengthen emotional discipline, improve communication, refine their goals, or rethink destructive patterns. Comfort often hides problems that pain eventually reveals. This is why many life-changing opportunities appear only after failure. Failure forces reflection. Reflection creates awareness. Awareness creates change. People who never experience rejection often become emotionally fragile because their confidence depends entirely on success. The moment life becomes difficult, they struggle to adapt. But people who survive rejection gradually build emotional endurance. They learn they can survive disappointment without losing themselves completely. Over time, this creates strength that success alone could never teach. Another hidden opportunity inside rejection is clarity. Sometimes people chase goals that are not truly aligned with who they are. Society constantly pressures individuals to pursue approval, status, money, or validation from others. As a result, many people spend years chasing things they never deeply wanted. Rejection can interrupt this cycle and force deeper self-examination. A person may pursue a career mainly to impress others, only to feel devastated when rejected. But after reflection, they may realize the path never genuinely fulfilled them. Another person may desperately seek acceptance from people who never valued them properly. Rejection eventually exposes relationships where approval had to be constantly earned rather than freely given. Not every closed door is a punishment. Some closed doors are protection from environments that would slowly destroy confidence, peace, or authenticity. This becomes easier to understand with time and maturity. In the beginning, rejection often feels unfair because people focus on immediate emotions instead of long-term consequences. But life is filled with examples of individuals who discovered their best opportunities only because earlier plans failed. Many successful people originally pursued entirely different paths before rejection forced them to reconsider their direction. Many strong individuals developed confidence only after experiencing periods of loneliness, criticism, or failure. Many people discovered their true abilities only after being pushed outside comfortable situations. The important lesson is not that rejection magically guarantees success. Rejection alone changes nothing. What changes people is how they respond to it. Some people allow disappointment to make them bitter, fearful, and emotionally closed. Others use rejection as information. They reflect, adapt, improve, and continue moving forward with greater wisdom. The same painful experience can either weaken a person permanently or become the beginning of transformation. This is why perspective matters so much. At first, rejection narrows vision. People focus only on what they lost. But emotionally resilient individuals eventually ask different questions. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" they ask, "What can this experience teach me?" Instead of seeing rejection as evidence of failure, they begin viewing it as part of growth. This mindset creates emotional freedom because it removes the belief that one outcome controls an entire future. Life is unpredictable. Some opportunities disappear unexpectedly. Some relationships end without explanation. Some goals take longer than expected. But rejection does not mean life is over. Often, it means life is changing direction. And sometimes, the opportunities waiting beyond rejection are greater than the plans people originally fought so hard to protect. The challenge is that these opportunities are rarely visible immediately. They only become clear after patience, growth, and continued effort. That is why emotionally strong people learn not to build their entire identity around one moment, one person, or one outcome. Every no carries pain, but it may also carry possibility. Hidden inside many rejections are lessons, redirection, self-awareness, resilience, and opportunities that would never have appeared otherwise. Sometimes the most important door in your life only opens because another one closed first. Chapter 4. How fear of rejection controls your life. Fear of rejection controls more lives than most people realize. It influences decisions quietly, often without people noticing it directly. Many individuals believe they are making practical choices, staying realistic, or avoiding unnecessary risk, when in reality they are simply trying to avoid emotional discomfort. The fear of being judged, criticized, ignored, or rejected becomes so powerful that it begins shaping behavior, limiting opportunities, and controlling potential. One of the most dangerous things about fear of rejection is that it rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Most people do not openly admit they are afraid. Instead, fear hides behind excuses, delays, perfectionism, overthinking, and self-doubt. A person says they are waiting for the right time when the real issue is fear of failure. Someone claims they are not ready yet when they are actually terrified of criticism. Another person convinces themselves their dream is unrealistic simply because rejection feels emotionally unbearable. This pattern slowly creates a life built around safety instead of growth. Human beings naturally want acceptance. They want to feel respected, valued, and included. Because of this, criticism and rejection can feel threatening to self-esteem. The mind begins trying to protect itself from emotional pain by avoiding situations where rejection is possible. At first, this may seem harmless. Avoiding one uncomfortable conversation or delaying one risky decision does not appear life-changing. But over time, avoidance becomes a habit, and habits eventually shape identity. Many people spend years remaining silent about what they truly want because they fear how others will respond. They avoid expressing opinions, sharing ideas, starting projects, or pursuing opportunities because they imagine rejection before they even begin. The fear becomes stronger than the desire for growth. One of the clearest examples of this happens in the modern digital world. Many people dream about creating content, starting businesses, building audiences, or sharing creative work online. They imagine creating videos, writing books, launching channels, or speaking publicly. But countless people never begin because they fear criticism from strangers, judgment from friends, or embarrassment if they fail publicly. Someone may want to start a YouTube channel for years, but continue delaying it because they imagine negative comments, low views, or people laughing at them. The fear of rejection becomes so intense that they never even give themselves the chance to improve. Instead of experiencing temporary discomfort, they choose long-term regret. This is how fear quietly steals potential. Most dreams do not die because people lack talent. Many dreams die because fear convinces people not to begin. The painful truth is that avoiding rejection may protect someone from short-term embarrassment, but it also prevents growth, confidence, and opportunity. A person who never risks failure may avoid disappointment temporarily, but they also avoid progress. Over time, this creates emotional frustration because deep down, most people know when they are living below their potential. Regret often grows from inaction more than failure. People rarely spend years obsessing over every rejection they experienced, but many people spend years thinking about opportunities they never pursued. They wonder what would have happened if they had started earlier, spoken honestly, applied for the opportunity, or taken the risk despite uncertainty. Fear creates an invisible prison because it convinces people that emotional safety is more important than growth. The comfort zone feels safe because it is familiar. There is less judgment, less uncertainty, and less emotional exposure. But comfort zones also create stagnation. Nothing changes because nothing is challenged. Confidence cannot grow inside constant avoidance. Many people mistakenly believe confidence comes before action. They think they must feel fearless before pursuing difficult goals. But psychologically, confidence is usually built after action, not before it. Courage is developed through repeated exposure to discomfort. A person becomes more confident speaking publicly by speaking publicly despite fear. Someone becomes emotionally stronger in relationships by risking vulnerability despite uncertainty. A creator becomes less afraid of criticism by consistently creating despite judgment. In other words, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to act while fear still exists. This is important because waiting for fear to disappear completely often means waiting forever. Fear is a natural human response to uncertainty. Even successful, experienced, and emotionally strong people still experience fear of rejection at times. The difference is that they no longer allow fear to make decisions for them. Emotionally resilient individuals understand something powerful. Rejection is survivable. Criticism is survivable. Embarrassment is survivable. Failure is survivable. Once people truly understand this through experience, fear begins losing control over their lives. This does not mean rejection suddenly becomes enjoyable. Emotional discomfort still exists. But the mind gradually stops treating rejection as catastrophic. Instead of seeing rejection as proof of inadequacy, resilient people begin viewing it as part of growth and learning. The greatest tragedy is not rejection itself. The greatest tragedy is allowing fear of rejection to prevent a person from becoming who they could have been. Every meaningful goal involves uncertainty. Every form of growth includes discomfort. Every opportunity carries the possibility of failure. But avoiding all rejection also means avoiding transformation. Life changes when people stop asking, "What if I fail?" and begin asking, "What happens if I never try?" At the end of life, most people will not be haunted by every criticism they faced. They will be haunted by the version of themselves they never allowed to exist because fear kept them trapped in hesitation. The fear of rejection only controls your life for as long as you continue obeying it. Chapter 5. The difference between successful and unsuccessful people. One of the biggest misconceptions about successful people is that they experience less rejection than everyone else. From the outside, success often appears smooth and effortless. People see confidence, recognition, achievement, and influence, but they rarely see the years of failure, criticism, disappointment, and uncertainty that came before it. In reality, successful people are not individuals who avoided rejection. They are people who learned how to continue despite it. This is one of the most important differences between successful and unsuccessful individuals. It is not always intelligence, talent, background, or luck that separates them. Often the real difference is emotional resilience. Unsuccessful people tend to interpret rejection as a final conclusion. Successful people tend to interpret rejection as part of the process. This mindset changes everything. Most people approach goals hoping to avoid rejection entirely. They apply for opportunities expecting immediate success. They start projects hoping everyone will support them. They pursue dreams expecting quick validation. When rejection appears, they become emotionally discouraged because reality did not match their expectations. Emotionally resilient people think differently. They expect rejection before it happens. They understand that criticism, failure, setbacks, and disappointment are normal parts of growth. Because of this, rejection shocks them less emotionally. They do not see obstacles as evidence they should quit. They see obstacles as part of the journey itself. This expectation creates psychological strength. When people believe success should happen quickly and smoothly, every failure feels personal. But when people understand that rejection is unavoidable, setbacks become easier to handle emotionally. Instead of collapsing after disappointment, resilient individuals remain focused on long-term progress. Persistence becomes more important than immediate approval. Many people quit too early because they depend too heavily on external validation. They want reassurance that they are talented, accepted, or successful before they continue. But growth rarely works this way. In most meaningful pursuits, results come much later than effort. A person may spend years developing skills before recognition appears. A creator may produce content for a long time before building an audience. Someone pursuing a career may face repeated rejection before finding the right opportunity. During these periods, emotionally weak individuals often stop because they assume rejection means they are incapable. Resilient people continue anyway. This does not mean they never feel discouraged. Successful people still experience disappointment, self-doubt, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. The difference is that they do not allow temporary emotions to permanently control their actions. This is a critical life skill that many people never develop, the ability to separate emotions from behavior. Emotionally reactive people often make decisions based entirely on how they feel in the moment. If they feel rejected, they stop trying. If they feel embarrassed, they hide. If they feel criticized, they become defensive or quit. Their emotions control their consistency. But emotionally disciplined people understand that feelings are temporary. They continue taking action even during periods of discomfort, uncertainty, or self-doubt. They recognize that emotional reactions should be acknowledged, but not obeyed blindly. This ability creates long-term success because consistency matters more than temporary motivation. Another major difference between successful and unsuccessful people is how they interpret failure itself. Unsuccessful individuals often treat failure as proof of inadequacy. Every mistake becomes evidence that they are not talented enough, smart enough, or capable enough. Because of this, they avoid situations where failure is possible. Protecting their ego becomes more important than improving their abilities. Successful people approach failure differently. They view failure as feedback. This mindset removes much of the emotional weight from rejection. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" Resilient people ask, "What can I learn from this experience?" This shift transforms rejection from a personal attack into useful information. Failure often reveals weaknesses that success hides. It exposes poor preparation, lack of discipline, ineffective habits, weak communication, unrealistic expectations, or areas that need improvement. While this feedback can feel uncomfortable, it is also extremely valuable for growth. A person rejected from multiple job interviews may realize they need stronger communication skills. Someone struggling to grow a business may recognize the need for better consistency or strategy. A creator receiving little attention may learn how to improve quality, clarity, or connection with an audience. None of these lessons become possible if rejection immediately causes someone to quit. The people who improve the most are usually the people willing to face discomfort repeatedly without allowing it to destroy their identity. This is why emotional resilience matters more than perfection. Perfectionists often struggle deeply with rejection because they fear mistakes so intensely that they stop taking risks altogether. But successful people understand that growth requires imperfection. Every skill develops through repetition, correction, failure, and adaptation. No one begins as an expert. Confidence is not built through constant success. Confidence is built by surviving difficulty and realizing you can continue despite setbacks. Another important difference is that successful people usually focus more on long-term goals than short-term emotions. They understand that rejection in one moment does not determine their entire future. Because of this, they are less likely to overreact emotionally to temporary setbacks. Emotionally reactive people often think only about immediate pain. Emotionally resilient people think about long-term consequences. They understand that temporary discomfort is often necessary for future growth. In many ways, success is less about avoiding rejection and more about developing the emotional strength to outlast it. The people who eventually succeed are rarely the people who never failed. More often, they are the people who refused to stop after failure appeared repeatedly. Rejection does not automatically make someone stronger, but learning how to respond to rejection with patience, persistence, self-awareness, and discipline can completely transform a person's life. The difference between successful and unsuccessful people is often simpler than it appears. One group allows rejection to end the story, while the other group continues writing it. Chapter 6: Turning Emotional Pain into Personal Power. Emotional pain is one of the most misunderstood experiences in human life. Most people assume pain is something to avoid, suppress, or escape as quickly as possible. But in reality, emotional pain is often one of the most powerful forces for transformation. Rejection, in particular, carries this kind of emotional weight. It can feel deeply personal, uncomfortable, and even overwhelming at times. Yet within that discomfort lies an opportunity that many people never recognize: the ability to turn pain into personal power. The natural reaction to rejection is emotional resistance. When people experience disappointment, criticism, or exclusion, the first instinct is often to retreat. The mind begins to replay the situation repeatedly, trying to make sense of what went wrong. Thoughts become repetitive, self-doubt increases, confidence weakens. In some cases, people begin to question their identity entirely based on a single moment or experience. But emotional pain does not have to end in self-destruction. It can also become a turning point. Pain becomes destructive only when it is misunderstood. When people interpret rejection as proof of inadequacy, they allow pain to weaken them. But when pain is understood as information, it becomes useful. It becomes something that can guide growth instead of limiting it. Rejection often reveals more about a person than success ever does. Success tends to reinforce confidence, but rejection exposes character. It shows how someone reacts under pressure, how they handle disappointment, and how they respond when things do not go as planned. These moments reveal emotional strengths and weaknesses that are often invisible during comfortable times. For example, rejection can expose how dependent a person is on external validation. If someone's confidence collapses after a single setback, it may reveal that their self-worth is not yet stable internally. On the other hand, if a person experiences disappointment but still continues working toward their goals, it reveals emotional resilience. Neither response is fixed permanently, but both provide valuable insight into where growth is needed. This is why emotional pain should not always be avoided. It should be understood. One of the most powerful ways to transform rejection is to shift its meaning. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" a more useful question becomes, "What is this experience showing me about myself?" This shift moves a person from victim mindset to growth mindset. It changes rejection from something that defines identity into something that develops it. Pain also plays a critical role in building emotional discipline. Discipline is not developed during easy moments. It is developed when continuing feels difficult. When emotions are heavy, motivation is low, and confidence is uncertain, the decision to keep moving forward becomes a conscious act of strength. Many people believe discipline is about control over external behavior, but true discipline begins internally. It is the ability to stay consistent even when emotions are unstable. Rejection often becomes the environment where this discipline is tested and strengthened. A person who continues working after failure is building emotional endurance. Someone who keeps learning after criticism is strengthening mental flexibility. A person who refuses to quit after disappointment is developing persistence that cannot easily be broken. Over time, these repeated responses to pain create a stronger identity. Identity is not formed in a single moment. It is built through patterns of behavior. Every time a person chooses growth over avoidance, strength over fear, and persistence over quitting, they reinforce a more resilient version of themselves. Rejection becomes one of the most effective forces in shaping this identity because it forces choice. It demands a response. Either a person allows rejection to shrink them, or they use it to expand. Many people underestimate how powerful emotional experience can be in shaping long-term character. Hard experiences often become the foundation of inner strength. People rarely become strong through comfort alone. Strength develops through overcoming difficulty, managing disappointment, and learning how to continue despite emotional resistance. This does not mean people should seek unnecessary suffering. It means that when difficulty naturally occurs, it should not be wasted. Emotional pain can either be avoided or transformed. Avoidance keeps a person in the same place. Transformation moves a person forward. One of the most important realizations in personal development is that emotions are not permanent states. They are responses to experiences. Rejection may create sadness, frustration, or confusion, but these emotions do not define a person's entire future unless they are allowed to remain unchallenged. Emotional intelligence grows when people learn to observe their emotions without being controlled by them. Instead of reacting impulsively to pain, resilient individuals begin to pause, reflect, and choose their response. This creates a gap between feeling and action. In that gap, personal power begins to develop. For example, after rejection, one person may immediately stop trying to avoid further discomfort. Another person may use that same experience to identify weaknesses, improve skills, or adjust strategies. The external event is the same, but the internal response determines the outcome. This is why emotional pain can either destroy potential or build strength. Another important aspect of turning pain into power is acceptance. Not acceptance in the sense of giving up, but acceptance in the sense of acknowledging reality without distortion. Many people struggle with rejection because they resist what has already happened. They replay it, deny it, or try to mentally undo it. This resistance increases emotional suffering. Acceptance does not remove pain, but it reduces unnecessary suffering. Once a person accepts what has happened, they can begin to respond more clearly and effectively. They stop fighting reality and start working with it. From acceptance comes clarity. From clarity comes direction. From direction comes action, and from action comes change. Over time, individuals who consistently transform rejection into learning develop a different relationship with pain. They no longer see it as something purely negative. They begin to recognize it as a signal that growth is possible. They understand that emotional discomfort often appears when they are stepping outside old limitations. This does not make rejection easy, but it makes it meaningful, and meaning is what gives pain purpose. When people begin to see rejection as part of development rather than evidence of failure, their entire approach to life changes. They become more willing to take risks, more open to learning, and more resilient in the face of uncertainty. Instead of avoiding discomfort, they begin to navigate through it. Personal power is not the absence of pain. It is the ability to use pain without being destroyed by it. Rejection, when understood correctly, becomes one of the most powerful teachers in life. It reveals weaknesses, strengthens discipline, builds emotional resilience, and shapes identity. It does not define a person, but it can refine them. The people who grow the most are not those who experience the least pain. They are the ones who learn how to turn emotional pain into direction, discipline, and strength. Chapter 7. Why some rejections save your life. One of the hardest truths to accept about rejection is that not every no is a loss. In the moment, rejection almost always feels like something valuable has been taken away. A job opportunity, a relationship, an admission, a business deal, or a chance you deeply wanted can feel like a turning point that went wrong. But with time and perspective, many people begin to realize something important. Some rejections are not setbacks, they are protection. Human beings naturally judge opportunities based on what they can see in the present. When something looks promising, exciting, or meaningful, the mind quickly attaches hope to it. People imagine future success, stability, happiness, or progress. Because of this emotional attachment, rejection feels like destruction of a positive future. But what is often invisible in the moment are the long-term consequences of certain paths. Not every opportunity is meant for every person. This is one of the most difficult ideas to understand when emotions are involved. A job may appear perfect on the surface, but later turn out to be toxic, overwhelming, or misaligned with a person's values. A relationship may feel exciting in the beginning, but gradually become emotionally draining or unstable. An opportunity may look like success, but lead to long-term stress, dissatisfaction, or burnout. When rejection happens in these situations, people often feel disappointed because they only see what they lost, but they do not see what they were protected from. Life is not always about giving people what they want immediately. Sometimes, life removes things to prevent deeper problems later. This is why some rejections can only be understood with distance and reflection. At first, rejection feels like a closed door, but later it can reveal itself as a redirection away from something harmful or limiting. Many people have experienced moments where they were rejected from something they desperately wanted, only to later discover that it would not have been right for them. A job that seemed ideal might have demanded unhealthy working hours, poor environment, or no growth potential. A relationship that felt essential might have eventually led to emotional imbalance, loss of self-respect, or long-term dissatisfaction. At the time, rejection feels painful because it interrupts expectation, but expectation is not always aligned with reality. This is why rejection can act as a form of protection, even when it is not immediately understood that way. Life often works in patterns that are only visible over time. What feels like loss in the present can become clarity in the future. When one door closes, it may not only be removing an option, it may also be removing a path that would have led to stagnation, stress, or emotional harm. Some environments are not designed for every individual to thrive in them. Certain workplaces, relationships, or social situations may look attractive externally, but may not support a person's long-term growth. Being rejected from such environments can feel discouraging, but it can also prevent emotional damage that might have taken years to recover from. One of the reasons people struggle to recognize this in the moment is because emotional attachment clouds judgment. When someone wants something deeply, They tend to focus only on positive possibilities. The mind naturally filters out risks, warning signs, or potential disadvantages. This creates a strong bias toward desire rather than reality. Rejection interrupts this bias. It forces a pause. It creates space for reflection that might not have happened otherwise. In some cases, rejection is not only protection from external environments, but also protection from internal limitations that have not yet been developed. A person may not yet have the emotional maturity, skill set, discipline or experience needed for a certain role or situation. Being rejected at that stage is not a reflection of permanent inability. It may simply be timing. With time, preparation and growth, that same person may later succeed in similar opportunities with far better outcomes. This is why timing plays such an important role in life outcomes. An opportunity can be right, but the timing can be wrong. Rejection in such cases is not punishment. It is delay for development. Another important perspective is that rejection often forces people to explore alternatives they would never have considered otherwise. When one path closes, attention naturally shifts to other possibilities. These alternative paths are often less obvious, but sometimes more aligned with long-term fulfillment. Many people only discover their true strengths, interests, or career direction after being redirected away from their initial plans. What feels like being blocked from one opportunity often becomes exposure to a better one. For example, a person may be rejected from a job they strongly wanted, feeling deeply disappointed at first. But this rejection may later lead them to another career path that offers better balance, higher income, improved mental health, or greater purpose. If the first opportunity had worked out, they may never have explored the second option. At the time, rejection feels like limitation, but later it often becomes expansion. This is not about idealizing rejection or pretending that all disappointment is positive. Emotional pain is still real. People are allowed to feel frustration, sadness, and confusion. But emotional honesty should be paired with long-term perspective. Not every closed door is permanent loss. Some doors close to protect direction. The challenge is that this understanding only becomes clear in hindsight. In the present moment, people rarely have full information about what lies ahead. They only see what is immediately in front of them. This is why rejection feels final even when it is not. With time, however, patterns begin to emerge. People start recognizing that certain rejections led them toward better environments, stronger skills, healthier relationships, or more meaningful goals. This realization gradually changes how they interpret future setbacks. Instead of seeing rejection as failure, they begin to see it as redirection. This shift in perception reduces emotional suffering significantly. It does not eliminate disappointment, but it reduces the tendency to attach identity to every outcome. A rejection becomes an event rather than a definition. Life often protects people in ways they only understand later. What feels like being denied something important may actually be life preventing them from entering situations that are not aligned with their long-term well-being. The difficulty lies in trusting that process while it is happening. But over time, experience teaches an important lesson. Not everything meant for others is meant for you, and not everything you lose is actually a loss. Some rejections do not take something away from your life. They remove something that would have taken something from you. Chapter 8. Building confidence after rejection. Confidence is often misunderstood as something people either have or do not have. In reality, confidence is not a fixed personality trait. It is a condition that is built, weakened, and rebuilt through experience. Rejection plays a central role in this process because it directly challenges how a person sees themselves. After rejection, confidence does not disappear all at once. It gradually weakens through interpretation, self-talk, and inaction. Many people believe confidence should come before action. They wait until they feel ready before trying again, speaking up, applying, or taking risks. But in real life, confidence rarely comes first. It is usually rebuilt through action, not overthinking. After rejection, the mind tends to become overly active. People replay events repeatedly. They analyze what went wrong, what they should have done differently, and how others might perceive them now. While reflection can be useful in moderation, excessive overthinking often leads to paralysis. Instead of rebuilding confidence, it reinforces hesitation. This is why many people feel stuck after rejection. They are not actually stuck in reality. They are stuck in thought. Confidence begins to rebuild only when thinking is replaced by doing. Action interrupts negative cycles of overanalysis. Even small actions can begin to shift emotional momentum. A person who continues applying, learning, practicing, or engaging with life after rejection slowly restores their belief in themselves. Not because rejection disappears, but because action proves that rejection does not define capability. One of the most important elements of rebuilding confidence is self-respect. Self-respect grows when a person continues despite setbacks. Every time someone chooses not to quit after disappointment, they send a message to themselves. I am still capable of moving forward. Over time, these repeated decisions build internal stability. Self-respect is not built through success alone. It is built through consistency in difficult moments. When things are going well, it is easy to feel confident. But when rejection happens and a person still chooses to show up, that is where real self-respect is formed. Many people underestimate how much confidence is connected to behavior patterns. Confidence is not only about how someone feels emotionally, it is also about what they repeatedly do. When someone avoids action after rejection, their brain begins to associate rejection with stopping. Over time, this creates a conditioned response. Rejection leads to withdrawal. But when someone continues taking action despite rejection, a different pattern forms. Rejection leads to persistence. This is how confidence is rebuilt at a behavioral level. Small wins play a critical role in this process. After rejection, expecting immediate major success is unrealistic. Confidence does not return in one large moment. It returns gradually through small, consistent evidence that progress is still possible. A small win could be something as simple as completing a task, improving a skill, finishing a piece of work, applying for another opportunity, or taking one step forward that was previously avoided. These small actions may seem insignificant individually, but psychologically they accumulate. Each small win acts as proof that rejection has not removed capability. It reinforces the idea that progress is still happening, even if slowly. Over time, these small wins rebuild trust in one's own ability. Trust in oneself is the foundation of confidence. Without trust, every action feels uncertain. With trust, action becomes easier, even in the presence of fear or doubt. Another key part of rebuilding confidence after rejection is learning not to personalize outcomes. One of the most damaging mental habits after rejection is internalizing it as identity. Instead of seeing rejection as an event, people often turn it into a personal judgment. They begin to think, I was rejected because I am not good enough, or this happened because something is wrong with me. This type of thinking slowly erodes confidence because it turns temporary experiences into permanent self-definitions. In reality, most rejections are not personal in the way people assume. They are often influenced by timing, competition, limited opportunities, external circumstances, subjective preferences, or simple misalignment. When people personalize rejection, they assign meaning that may not actually exist. Rejection becomes more powerful emotionally when it is tied to identity. But when rejection is separated from identity, its emotional impact becomes more manageable. A person can acknowledge, this did not work out, without concluding, I am not good enough. This separation is essential for rebuilding confidence. Confidence is not about eliminating rejection from life. That is impossible. Confidence is about maintaining self-trust despite rejection. It is the ability to say, this setback does not define my potential or my future. Another important realization is that confidence is often rebuilt through exposure. Avoiding situations after rejection may feel safe, but avoidance reinforces fear. When a person avoids similar opportunities, their brain begins to associate those situations with danger or emotional pain. This makes future attempts even harder. On the other hand, gradual exposure to similar situations helps normalize discomfort. Each time a person re-engages with a challenging situation after rejection, the emotional intensity decreases slightly. Over time, what once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. This is how emotional resilience develops in practical terms. Rebuilding confidence also requires patience. Many people expect immediate emotional recovery after rejection, but confidence does not return instantly because emotional trust takes time to rebuild. The mind needs repeated evidence that it is safe to try again. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single strong effort does not rebuild confidence. Repeated small efforts do. Another important aspect of confidence recovery is reducing comparison. After rejection, people often compare themselves to others who appear more successful, accepted, or confident. This comparison deepens emotional damage because it reinforces feelings of inadequacy. But confidence cannot grow in an environment of constant comparison. Growth requires focusing on personal progress rather than external benchmarks. The only meaningful comparison is between who a person was before rejection and who they are becoming after it. Even slow progress is still progress. Rejection often feels like a setback because it interrupts expectations. But expectations are not always accurate reflections of reality. Sometimes expectations are based on assumptions, hopes, or ideal outcomes rather than actual circumstances. When reality does not match expectation, disappointment is natural. But disappointment does not equal defeat. Confidence returns when expectations are realigned with experience. One of the strongest signs that confidence is rebuilding is when a person starts taking action without waiting for perfect emotional readiness. They begin to act even with uncertainty. They begin to try even with fear. They begin to move forward even with doubt present. This is not about eliminating emotion. It is about not being controlled by it. Over time, something important begins to happen. Rejection loses its emotional dominance. It still exists as an experience, but it no longer defines self-worth or capability. It becomes one part of a larger journey instead of the defining moment. The goal is not to never feel affected by rejection. The goal is to stop allowing rejection to permanently interrupt growth. Confidence after rejection is not rebuilt through avoidance, overthinking, or waiting for reassurance. It is rebuilt through action, persistence, small wins, self-respect, and the decision to stop turning temporary outcomes into permanent identities. Every step taken after rejection is a quiet reminder you are still capable, still learning, and still moving forward. Chapter 9. Using rejection as motivation. Rejection is often experienced as something that reduces energy. It lowers motivation, weakens confidence, and creates emotional heaviness. But what many people do not realize is that rejection can also become one of the most powerful sources of motivation when it is processed correctly. The same emotional experience that causes discouragement can also become fuel for long-term discipline and growth. The difference lies in interpretation and direction. When rejection is internalized negatively, it turns into self-doubt. When it is redirected constructively, it becomes motivation. This transformation does not happen automatically. It requires awareness, emotional control, and a conscious decision to respond differently to disappointment. Many high-performing individuals in different fields have experienced rejection at critical stages of their lives. What separates them is not the absence of rejection, but how they used it afterward. Some people allow rejection to define their limits. Others allow it to redefine their effort. One of the most common emotional responses to rejection is disappointment. Disappointment is natural because it reflects the gap between expectation and reality. When people invest time, energy, or emotional commitment into something and it does not work out, the mind naturally reacts with frustration. Alongside disappointment, there is often anger, sadness, confusion, or embarrassment. These emotions are not inherently negative, they are signals. The problem arises when these emotions are left unmanaged or misdirected. Anger, for example, is often viewed negatively, but psychologically, anger is also a form of energy. It creates intensity, urgency, and focus. If that energy is uncontrolled, it can lead to frustration or self-destruction. But if it is redirected properly, it can become discipline. The key is not to suppress emotional responses after rejection, but to channel them. Many people fail to grow from rejection because they either avoid their emotions completely or become consumed by them. Avoidance leads to suppression, where emotions are ignored but still influence behavior indirectly. Overreaction leads to impulsive decisions, such as quitting, giving up, or avoiding similar opportunities altogether. Neither response leads to growth. Constructive transformation happens when emotions are acknowledged and then redirected toward action. For example, disappointment can be converted into focus. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" a more productive question becomes, "What can I improve so this does not stop me again?" Anger can be converted into discipline by increasing effort, consistency, or commitment to improvement. Even embarrassment can be transformed into determination to build competence. Rejection becomes powerful when it stops being a conclusion and starts becoming a trigger for development. One of the most effective ways people use rejection as motivation is by shifting focus from external validation to internal improvement. When motivation is based only on approval from others, it becomes unstable. A single rejection can destroy it. But when motivation is connected to personal growth and purpose, rejection becomes part of the journey instead of the end of it. Long-term success rarely comes from instant recognition. It usually comes from consistency in the face of repeated setbacks. Many people underestimate how important consistency is compared to initial talent or early success. In reality, persistence over time often matters more than initial ability. When a person uses rejection as motivation, they stop interpreting it as a signal to quit and start interpreting it as a signal to improve. Instead of stepping back permanently, they step back temporarily to refine their approach, strengthen their skills, or adjust their strategy. This mindset shift changes everything. Rejection can reveal gaps that success does not expose. When things go smoothly, there is often little incentive to change or improve. But when rejection occurs, it forces reflection. It highlights weaknesses, inconsistencies, or areas that need development. People who use rejection effectively do not waste this information, they use it to evolve. This is why rejection often plays a role in building long-term excellence. It forces individuals to confront reality, identify limitations, and take corrective action. One important psychological shift in using rejection as motivation is separating identity from outcome. When people attach their identity to results, rejection feels like a personal attack. But when identity is separated from outcomes, rejection becomes neutral information. For example, if someone fails at an attempt, they can either think, "I am a failure," or "this attempt did not work." The first interpretation damages motivation. The second interpretation preserves it while still acknowledging reality. The ability to separate emotional identity from performance outcomes is one of the key differences between people who recover from rejection and those who remain stuck in it. Another important aspect of turning rejection into motivation is developing long-term thinking. Emotional reactions to rejection are usually short-term focused. They concentrate on immediate discomfort, disappointment, or loss. But long-term thinking allows individuals to see beyond the present moment. When someone adopts a long-term perspective, rejection becomes less threatening. Instead of asking, "What does this mean about me right now?" they begin asking, "How can I use this experience to improve over time?" This shift reduces emotional intensity and increases constructive action. Many successful individuals are not motivated by constant external praise. In fact, they often develop motivation through periods of rejection, doubt, or difficulty. These experiences create a desire to improve, to prove capability, or to refine discipline. However, over time, the healthiest form of motivation becomes internal rather than external. This means improvement is no longer driven by the need to prove others wrong, but by the commitment to personal growth. There is an important distinction between short-term reactive motivation and long-term purposeful motivation. Reactive motivation often comes from emotional spikes, such as anger, frustration, or disappointment. While this can be powerful initially, it often fades quickly if not supported by discipline. Purposeful motivation, on the other hand, is rooted in values, goals, and identity development. The most effective way to use rejection is to combine both. Emotional energy provides initial momentum, but purpose provides direction and sustainability. For example, an athlete who is not selected for a team may initially feel anger or disappointment. This emotional reaction can create powerful motivation to improve. But if that motivation is only emotional, it may fade over time. However, if the athlete connects that experience to a deeper purpose, such as becoming stronger, more disciplined, or mastering their skill, then motivation becomes sustainable. They begin training not just to respond to rejection, but to build a stronger version of themselves. This principle applies in many areas of life. A rejected job application can lead to deeper skill development. A failed business attempt can lead to better strategy and understanding. A personal setback can lead to emotional maturity and resilience. In each case, rejection becomes useful only when it leads to action. Without action, rejection remains emotional pain. With action, it becomes transformation. One of the most important habits for using rejection as motivation is immediate redirection. After experiencing rejection, many people stay mentally stuck in analysis or emotional replay. While reflection is useful, prolonged emotional focus can reduce momentum. Redirecting attention toward improvement helps prevent stagnation. This does not mean ignoring emotions. It means not staying trapped in them. The goal is to acknowledge the experience, extract the lesson, and then move toward action. Over time, people who consistently use rejection as motivation develop a stronger psychological foundation. They become less sensitive to external approval and more focused on internal progress. They stop fearing rejection as an endpoint and start viewing it as a step in development. Eventually, rejection loses its ability to stop them. Instead, it becomes one of the reasons they continue. In this way, rejection is no longer just something that happens to them, it becomes something they use. And when rejection is transformed into motivation, it stops being a barrier and becomes a tool for long-term success. Chapter 10. The freedom of no longer needing approval. One of the deepest forms of personal freedom is not financial, social, or external success. It is psychological independence. It is the moment a person no longer needs approval from others to feel secure in their choices, identity, or direction in life. This form of freedom is rare, because most people spend a significant part of their lives unconsciously seeking validation. They want to be accepted, understood, appreciated, and approved of. While this is a natural human need, it becomes limiting when it starts controlling decisions, behavior, and self-worth. The need for approval often begins early in life. People learn to associate acceptance with safety. Being praised feels good. Being criticized feels uncomfortable, and being rejected feels painful. Over time, many individuals begin to adjust their behavior, not based on what they believe is right or meaningful, but based on what they think will be accepted by others. This creates a subtle but powerful dependency on external validation. The problem with this dependency is that it slowly disconnects a person from their authentic self. Instead of acting according to internal values, they begin to act according to external expectations. They become more focused on how they are perceived than on who they actually are. Decisions become filtered through the question, will others approve of this, rather than is this right for me? At first, this pattern may seem harmless or even socially beneficial. Seeking approval can help people fit into groups, avoid conflict, and maintain relationships. But when approval becomes the primary driver of behavior, it begins to weaken authenticity. People start suppressing opinions, hiding preferences, and adjusting their identity depending on the environment they are in. Over time, this leads to internal conflict. On the outside, a person may appear socially successful or well-liked, but internally, they may feel uncertain, disconnected, or unfulfilled. This is because they are not fully living in alignment with themselves. They are living in alignment with perception. Rejection plays a major role in exposing this pattern. When approval is not received, people often experience discomfort, not only because of the rejection itself, but because it challenges their dependence on validation. If self-worth is tied to approval, then rejection feels like a threat to identity. But when self-worth is internal, rejection becomes less emotionally destabilizing. The shift from external validation to internal trust is one of the most important psychological transformations a person can experience. It does not happen instantly. It is developed gradually, through experience, reflection, and repeated exposure to situations where approval is uncertain. One of the first stages of this transformation is realizing how often decisions are influenced by fear of judgment. Many people do not consciously recognize how frequently they adjust their behavior based on imagined reactions from others. They may avoid expressing ideas in meetings, hesitate to pursue unconventional goals, or suppress personal preferences simply because they anticipate criticism or misunderstanding. This creates a life that is shaped more by perception than intention. When a person begins to recognize this pattern, they also begin to see how much energy is spent trying to manage how they are perceived. Constantly monitoring reactions, adjusting behavior, and seeking reassurance becomes mentally exhausting. It also limits creativity and growth because it encourages conformity over originality. True freedom begins when a person starts making decisions without constantly seeking external permission. This does not mean ignoring feedback or rejecting social awareness. It means no longer allowing external approval to determine self-worth or direction. A person can still listen, learn, and adapt while maintaining internal stability. The difference lies in who has final authority over decisions, external opinions, or internal clarity. People who constantly seek validation often struggle with inconsistency in identity. They may change opinions depending on who they are with, adjust goals based on social expectations, or modify behavior to avoid criticism. While this can create short-term acceptance, it often leads to long-term instability. Without internal grounding, identity becomes fragile. On the other hand, individuals who develop internal validation begin to rely less on approval and more on personal values. They make decisions based on what aligns with their goals, principles, and understanding of life, even if others do not immediately agree. This often results in being misunderstood at times, but it also leads to stronger self-respect and clarity. One of the most important realizations in this process is that not being understood is not the same as being wrong. Many people avoid authentic expression because they fear misunderstanding. They assume that if others do not immediately approve or understand their choices, something must be incorrect. But in reality, growth and originality are often misunderstood at first. History and everyday life both show that people who challenge norms, pursue different paths, or think independently are often questioned or doubted initially. However, over time, consistent action and results often speak louder than initial perception. The willingness to be misunderstood is a powerful form of emotional strength. When a person stops needing approval, something important begins to shift internally. Decision-making becomes clearer because it is no longer filtered through fear. Creativity increases because expression is no longer restricted by judgment. Emotional stability improves because self-worth is no longer dependent on external responses. This does not mean rejection or criticism no longer affects a person emotionally. It means those experiences no longer define identity or direction. Peace begins to emerge when a person trusts their own judgment. Trust in oneself does not mean being always correct. It means being willing to learn, adjust, and continue without collapsing internally when external approval is not received. Self-trust is built through experience. Every time a person makes a decision aligned with their values and survives the outcome, their internal confidence strengthens. Even when results are not perfect, the ability to stand by one's own choices builds psychological stability. One of the greatest sources of emotional stress in modern life is the constant comparison to others. Social environments often encourage comparison through visible achievements, opinions, and lifestyles. When people constantly measure themselves against others, approval becomes even more important because it is tied to perceived status. Breaking free from this requires a shift in focus from external comparison to internal progress. Instead of asking how one is perceived by others, the more important question becomes whether one is growing relative to their own past. When approval is no longer the central goal, life becomes less reactive and more intentional. Decisions are made with clarity instead of fear. Actions are guided by purpose rather than pressure. Emotional stability increases because self-worth is no longer fragile. Freedom, in this sense, is not about becoming isolated or indifferent to others. It is about becoming internally anchored. It is the ability to listen without dependency, to consider feedback without losing direction, and to engage with the world without surrendering identity. The strongest mindset is not one that is always validated. The strongest mindset is one that remains steady even when validation is absent. At this stage, rejection loses much of its emotional control. It is no longer a defining force. It becomes simply part of life experience. Approval is appreciated, but not required. Criticism is acknowledged, but not internalized. And most importantly, self-worth is no longer negotiated through external opinions. This is where true psychological freedom begins, not in being accepted by everyone, but in no longer needing to be. Rejection is not the final chapter of your life. In most cases, it is only a turning point that you did not understand at the time. What feels like an ending is often the beginning of a deeper process of growth, awareness, and transformation. Every no carries emotional weight. It can create doubt, disappointment, and moments where you question your direction. But over time, if you are willing to reflect instead of retreat, rejection begins to reveal something different. It shows you where you need to improve, where you need to grow, and where you need to redirect your energy. It removes illusions and replaces them with clarity. Your future is not determined by how many times you are accepted. It is shaped far more by how many times you continue after being rejected. Persistence builds what approval alone cannot. It builds discipline, resilience, and internal strength that does not depend on external validation. Every rejection contains a lesson, but only if you are willing to stay long enough to understand it. Some lessons improve your skills, some strengthen your mindset, some protect you from paths that were never meant for you. But all of them require one thing, the decision to keep going. Pain, when faced honestly, does not weaken you permanently. It sharpens you. It forces growth where comfort would have created stagnation. And when you refuse to quit, that same pain slowly transforms into power. The world often does not recognize people immediately. Many individuals who are respected today were once rejected, doubted, or overlooked. Their value did not increase later. It was always there. What changed was time, persistence, and consistency. Sometimes the rejection you hate in the present becomes the very reason you develop the strength, direction, and character needed for future success. So as you move forward from this audiobook, remember this: you are not defined by what rejected you. You are defined by how you respond after rejection. Rejected, but not defeated.